What's gaming, gamers? Today, I've got a build for you using the Warlock Stormcaller subclass and the Getaway Artist exotic arms. This Arclock build is designed to ensure you're never truly alone, allowing you to summon a little arc buddy to fight alongside you. To accomplish this, the Getaway Artist exotic arms are used along with their exotic perk, Dynamic Duo. Dynamic Duo will grant you the ability to consume your grenade, summoning a sentient Arc Soul to your aid for 20 seconds. Consuming your grenade to summon your Arc Soul will also instantly amplify you, meaning the sentient Arc Soul is always the amplified version of the Arc Soul. Being amplified will increase your Arc Soul's effectiveness, allowing it to shoot in bursts of 5 shots at 225 RPM versus an unamplified Arc Soul only shooting in bursts of 3 shots at 100 RPM. Furthermore, the sentient Arc Soul will grant you 5% grenade energy per burst shot, not per individual projectile, so long as one of the 5 projectiles shot damages a target. Now that you know what the Getaway Artist exotic arms do, I'll get into the subclass setup I've put together for this build. I'll put everything on screen as a prescriptive setup first, if that's what you prefer. Once that's done, I'll describe what each subclass element I've chosen does, as well as why I've chosen it. For your super, I prefer the Storm Train super. Run the Healing Rift, whichever jump you prefer, the Chain Lightning melee, the Flashbang grenade, the Arc Soul aspect, the Electrostatic Mind aspect, Spark of Amplitude, Spark of Discharge, Spark of Ions, and Spark of Recharge. As for the super, it really doesn't matter whether you use the Chaos Reach or Storm Trance. Getaway Artist doesn't buff either of them, and during these last few days of Season 20, they're both pretty mediocre supers as far as damage output goes. That will be changing in Season 21, as both the Storm Trance and Chaos Reach supers will be receiving 25% buffs to their overall damage output, as well as the ability to jolt targets in different ways. I find this build to be more fun as an ad clearing build overall, thus I personally use the Storm Trance super as it helps fulfill that fantasy. However, I will likely run Chaos Reach come Season 21, as the 25% extra damage and jolting capabilities will probably make it feel a lot better without having to run geomag stabilizers as well. For your Rift, you can run either the Healing or Empowering Rift, as they have identical cooldowns and both refresh the duration of your sentient Arc Soul. I choose the Healing Rift myself, as I don't need the extra damage granted by the Empowering Rift, and the survivability granted by the Healing Rift is beneficial to my playstyle. However, if you play more passively, or don't feel you need the healing, the Empowering Rift will be really good for furthering your damage output. As for the melee ability, I choose to run the Chain Lightning melee as it applies Jolt and that will synergize with the Spark of Ion's Fragment. Jolt also stuns Overload champions, which can be helpful in lower difficulty activities with champions such as Hero Nightfalls, as getting within melee range of overloads and higher difficulty content is not usually the smartest idea. The Ball Lightning melee will do more damage, has more range, and benefits more from being amplified than the Chain Lightning melee does, but it doesn't apply any arc keywords. Its cooldown is also 13 seconds longer than the Chain Lightning melee, which admittedly isn't much, but I prefer the slightly higher uptime and jolt applying capabilities of the Chain Lightning melee over the Ball Lightning melee's damage. It is effectively personal preference though, so try both of them and use whichever one you enjoy using more. For the grenade, I use the Flashbang grenade as it has the shortest base cooldown, meaning if you can't get anything to refund yourself grenade energy, it will be ready to consume the most often. As you won't be throwing the grenade too often, I don't see a point in using any of the other grenades. But if you do throw the Flashbang grenade, it will stun Unstoppable champions, meaning this build has both anti-overload and anti-unstoppable capabilities built into it without having to run any specific weaponry. None of the grenades give differing effects to the sentient Arc Soul, so the only reason to choose another grenade would be if you find yourself wanting to throw a grenade and for it to actually deal damage to something. Onto the aspects. Firstly, Arc Soul. The Arc Soul aspect will grant you and your teammates an Arc Soul upon entering a rift created by you for 20 seconds. Importantly, your teammates won't get the sentient Arc Soul, just the regular Arc Soul. Additionally, it won't be an improved Arc Soul with a higher fire rate unless they are also on the Arc subclass and amplified themselves. But the Rift will refresh your sentient Arc Soul's timer back to its maximum of 20 seconds, which makes it an invaluable tool for keeping your sentient Arc Soul up and generating grenade energy. With the Arc Soul aspect, your sentient Arc Soul has an effective maximum duration of 55 seconds. 20 seconds after consuming your grenade, the entire 15-second duration of your Rift, and 20 seconds after the Rift has dissipated. Furthermore, when playing in a fire team with others, the Arc Soul aspect will grant you an additive 40% boost to your Rift's recharge rate while nearby those teammates, up to a maximum of 120% when near 3 allies. With a high enough recovery stat, and if near enough teammates, you can theoretically extend the timer of your sentient Arc Soul indefinitely, but in reality it's not necessary as you'll have your grenade back up to be consumed before the theoretical 55-second maximum timer is fully elapsed anyways. The second aspect is the Electrostatic Mind aspect. Electrostatic Mind will cause any target defeated by any arc ability, or any jolted or blinded target defeated by any source of damage caused by you, to summon an Ionic Trace. Furthermore, collecting any Ionic Trace will instantly amplify you, which will keep your sentient Arc Soul at its maximum fire rate for longer. The sentient Arc Soul counts as an arc ability, thus will proc Electrostatic Mind, summoning an Ionic Trace upon defeating an enemy and amplifying you upon collecting that Ionic Trace. This means the sentient Arc Soul killing enemies for you doesn't detract from your total ability uptime, and actually increases your overall Ionic Trace generation, as Electrostatic Mind has no intrinsic cooldown, dissimilar to all of the Ionic Trace generating fragments. Speaking of fragments, to start, Spark of Amplitude will create an orb of power upon rapidly defeating targets while amplified. This works in the same way as the Siphon mods in your helmet do, where a multi-kill will summon an orb of power. However, with Spark of Amplitude, any source of damage rapidly defeating targets will summon an orb of power. This includes a weapon with any elemental affinity, as well as arc abilities, which includes your Sentient Arc Soul. This means, on top of your Sentient Arc Soul generating Ionic traces via the Electrostatic Mind aspect, it can also help to summon orbs of power via Spark of Amplitude so long as you're amplified. Spark of Amplitude does incur a 10-second cooldown upon the creation of an orb of power, which is unfortunate, but in practice it's simply an extra orb every 10 seconds, which makes it a worthwhile fragment to bring. The second fragment is Spark of Discharge. Spark of Discharge will let kills from your arc weapons add a percentage to a counter that will summon an Ionic trace upon reaching 100%. Rank and file enemies will add 34% to its counter, elites will grant 66%, and mini-bosses and bosses will always summon an Ionic trace. Spark of Discharge has no intrinsic cooldown, meaning the faster you kill enemies with an arc weapon, the more Ionic traces you'll summon. Lastly, Spark of Discharge comes with a -10 deficit to your strength stat, so keep that in mind when putting together your armor build. The third fragment is Spark of Ions. Spark of Ions will generate an Ionic trace upon defeating any enemy who is jolted on a 10-second cooldown. The only way this build has to jolt targets intrinsically is the Chain Lightning melee, but you can also use any weapon with Voltshot or any exotic weapon that applies jolt to get the same result. Because of this, if you don't have a Voltshot weapon, don't have an exotic weapon that applies jolt, or are instead running an arc special weapon, you can swap out Spark of Ions for Spark of Beacons. Spark of Beacons will cause any arc special weapon final blow to cause a blinding explosion, blinding any enemies nearby to the one killed. Then, because of the Electrostatic Mind aspect, killing each blinded target will summon an Ionic trace. Lastly for fragments is Spark of Recharge. Spark of Recharge will grant you a 400% boost to both your grenade and melee ability recharge rates while critically wounded, and will persist so long as you stay critically wounded. This isn't too impactful on the overall build, but will help your grenade to recharge significantly faster so you can reproc your Sentient Arc Soul if you find yourself needing to. With fragments now done, I'll get into a few artifact mods to choose if you're playing during these last few days of Season 20, the Season of Defiance. As this season's artifact isn't built around Arc 3.0 at all, there aren't too many mods that will be all that useful to use, so this section will be shorter than it usually is. On screen, you're seeing the artifact setup I use when running this build, and I'll highlight the important mods now. In the first column, run whichever anti-champion mods you feel you need for the content you'll be running. This build can stun both Overload and Unstoppable champions intrinsically, but it can be hard to rely on, so I would still recommend running at least one of each anti-champion mod. In the second column, run the Authorized mod for grenades. This will lower the cost of any armor mods that affect your grenades to a cost of 1 energy, which simply allows you to slot more of those mods into your armor. In the third column, run the Shatter Orbs mod. Shatter Orbs will cause an orb of power to be summoned upon the destruction of a combatant shield with the corresponding energy type. Shatter Orbs only works the first time you destroy that combatant shield, however, meaning you can't let its shield regenerate and infinitely farm orbs off of it. There aren't any mods that specifically synergize with this build in the fourth column, so I'll skip to the fifth. In the fifth column, run the Prismatic Transfer mod. This mod will grant your teammates a 20% boost to their outgoing weapon damage upon the casting of your super, so long as their subclass element differs from yours. This damage boost doesn't stack with any other damage boosts, like Radiant or Weapons of Light, but it's a helpful boost to your teammates' weapon damage while I don't have any other boosts proc. With the artifact now done, I can get into the armor setup for this build. I'll first go over my recommendations for stat distribution, then get into a prescriptive armor mod setup, and finally I'll detail what each mod I've chosen does as well as why I've chosen it. As for stat distribution, in the top 3 grouping of mobility, resilience, and recovery are the stats to focus. You can effectively ignore mobility. Resilience will grant you 3% damage resistance for every tier you have, up to 30% at tier 10. Recovery will lower the base cooldown of your rift, as well as decrease the delay timer before your health and shields start to regenerate, and increase the rate at which both your health and shields regenerate. For the bottom 3 stat grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, focus Discipline first, as it will govern the base cooldown of your grenade, which will help it recharge faster if you're not generating and collecting Ionic traces or orbs of power. Focus Strength next, and leave Intellect at or around tier 3. My armor stats have me at 22 mobility, 90 resilience, 70 recovery, 80 discipline, 40 intellect, and 60 strength. Onto the armor's mods, I'll first put everything on screen now as a prescriptive setup if that's what you prefer. On the helmet, run 3 harmonic siphon mods. On the arms, run 2 grenade kickstart mods. On the chest piece, run whichever resistance mods you need for the activity you'll be running. On the legs, run an absolution mod, an innervation mod, and a recuperation mod. On the bond, run 2 bomber mods and a reaper mod. To detail the mods, for your helmet, the 3 harmonic siphon mods will generate a very potent orb of power upon getting a multi-kill with any arc weapon. The potency of the orb will dictate how much super energy you gain when collecting the orb, which isn't super necessary for this build. Because of this, you can forego either 1 or 2 of the harmonic siphon mods for any other mod on the helmet if you want. If I'm not running 3 siphon mods, I'll usually have 2 siphons on and 1 power preservation mod on to generate extra orbs for my teammates when using the Stormtrance super. Alternatively, you can use either of the ammo finders if you feel you need ammo. Onto the arms mods, the 2 grenade kickstart mods will work to refund you grenade energy when consuming your grenade to summon your sentient Dark Soul. This has the benefit of ensuring your grenade is fully recharged when you need to refresh your sentient Dark Soul. Additionally, the more grenade energy you can refund and grant yourself, the more likely you are to be able to throw a grenade while your sentient Dark Soul is active and still have your grenade fully charged again when you need to consume it to resummon the sentient Dark Soul. Grenade kickstart will refund you more grenade energy the more stacks of armor charge you have, with each kickstart mod itself acting as a stack of armor charge for the purposes of its specific ability regeneration. As this build doesn't take advantage of any charged up mods, it can hold a maximum of 3 stacks of armor charge at one time. Those 3 stacks of armor charge, combined with 2 grenade kickstart mods, will refund you 37.8% grenade energy upon the consumption or throwing of your grenade. If you have 0 stacks of armor charge, the 2 grenade kickstart mods themselves will still refund you 17.15% grenade energy, making having 2 mods quite worthwhile even if you don't have any armor charge. For the chest pieces mods, I leave it open to run whichever resistance mods I need for the activity I'll be doing. Having 2 of any one elemental affinity resistance mod will grant you a 25% damage resistance to that specific element type. Unfortunately, having 3 of one elemental affinity resistance mod doesn't have any effect over simply having 2, so it would be a waste of a mod slot. For this reason, my usual setup is to run 2 of whichever resistance mod corresponds with the activity's threat modifier, and then a concussive dampener to lower received area of effect damage. For the legs mods, the Absolution mod will grant you 5% energy to all 3 of your abilities upon the collection of an Orb of Power. This isn't a significant amount by itself, but it will stack with other mods that grant energy upon orb pickup like Innervation. Innervation by itself will grant you 10% grenade energy upon the collection of an Orb of Power, which is then increased to 15% when combined with Absolution. Lastly, the Recuperation mod will grant you 70 health upon the collection of an Orb of Power, which will do well to increase your survivability in most encounters, as you'll want to be collecting Orbs of Power anyways to grant yourself ability energy and stacks of armor charge. If you want, you can forego the Absolution mod in favor of a Scavenger mod if you find yourself needing the ammo, or an Orbs of Restoration mod if you simply want extra energy for whichever ability has the least amount of energy upon picking up the Orb of Power. Lastly, for the Bonds mods, the 2 Bomber mods together will grant you 25% grenade energy upon the casting of your Rift. If you don't have your grenade up, but you do have your Rift, you can cast your Rift, which will grant you that 25% grenade energy. Additionally, because you're standing in your Rift, you'll have gained the normal Arc Soul from the Arc Soul aspect. If you then consume your grenade, it will instantly amplify you and convert your Arc Soul into the Sentient Arc Soul, which grants you grenade energy when it deals damage. The last mod is the Reaper mod, which will cause an Orb of Power to be summoned upon getting a weapon kill after having used your class ability. As you'll be using the class ability frequently to refresh your Sentient Arc Soul's duration, you'll have this Orb of Power very frequently for both armor charge and ability energy purposes. As an alternative, if you don't feel you need one or both of the Bomber mods, you can swap one or both of them out for 1 or 2 Outreach mods. Outreach will grant you melee energy instead of grenade energy upon the casting of your Rift, which will increase your jolt up time if you're running the Chain Lightning melee, or your overall damage output if you're running the Ball Lightning melee. With the armor build out of the way, I'll now get into some weapon recommendations I have for this build. First, however, I'll mention the weapon perk Voltshot. Voltshot is a weapon perk that synergizes very well with Arc 3.0. Upon getting a kill with a Voltshot weapon and then reloading, your next shot will jolt the target you hit with it. This will proc Spark of Ions to summon you an Ionic Trace when the enemy dies, provided it's off cooldown, as well as simply increasing the damage dealt to the target you've shot. In addition to Voltshot, there's the Demolitionist perk, which is more common than Voltshot and will do a similar job in generating ability energy, except Demolitionist does that specifically for your grenade versus Voltshot being able to summon Ionic Traces. As far as specific weapons go, however, I'll firstly talk about my favorite arc weapon, the Ikelos SMG V3. The Ikelos SMG is craftable, and its pattern is acquirable from world drop engrams and rank up rewards from Banshee. This aggressive frame SMG has a fantastic perk combination in that of Threat Detector in its 3rd column and Voltshot in its 4th column. Threat Detector will grant you increased stability, handling, and reload speed when within close proximity to enemies, with the buff being significantly increased when within close proximity of 2 or more enemies. Voltshot, as I've said, will allow the weapon to apply Jolt, which just increases its overall damage potential as well as its synergy with this subclass. Next, the Dark Decider auto rifle from the Iron Banner loot pool. Dark Decider isn't craftable, but is focusable at Lord Saladin during weeks when Iron Banner is active, meaning it's efficiently farmable. It also has a small perk pool, making getting the specific role you want much easier than it would be for a ritual playlist weapon. For specific perks I recommend, in its 3rd column, Subsistence will partially reload the magazine upon getting a kill. In its 4th column, Voltshot is the perk to hunt for. Unfortunately, neither Subsistence nor the origin trait, Viced Stinger, will proc Voltshot. You do have to manually reload the weapon to be able to proc it and jolt enemies. Lastly, for energy weapons, the Posterity Hand Cannon. Posterity is craftable, and its pattern is acquirable from the Descent encounter in the Deepstone Crypt raid. Posterity may not be the best hand cannon in the game, but it is currently the only one that can roll Voltshot, making it unique in that aspect. In its third column, Voltshot is the perk to choose to synergize with this build. In its fourth column, I like Frenzy a lot as it maxes out the reload stat of Posterity when procced, as well as granting it a 15% boost to damage. However, if you don't care for Frenzy, Rampage would be a good alternative to increase the total damage boost you can grant the weapon. There are only two heavy weapons that can roll Voltshot. Those are the Sailspy Pitch Class Linear Fusion Rifle that was available during Season 18, the Season of Plunder, and the Terminus Horizon Machine Gun, which is acquirable from all 3 encounters in the Spire of the Watcher dungeon. Unfortunately, Sailspy Pitch Glass isn't available anymore, barring waiting for Banshee or Xur to sell it. However, Terminus Horizon is acquirable and is a really fun weapon to use. In its third column, I recommend either Rapid Hit or Demolitionist for the reload speed or grenade energy generation, and in its fourth column, Voltshot is the perk to choose. I prefer Rapid Hit in the third column over Demolitionist, as at 5 stacks of Rapid Hit, Terminus Horizon is granted 60 reload speed, which makes the gun feel a lot better to use with a perk like Voltshot that requires reloading to proc. I'm not actually sure if Demolitionist reloading the weapon will proc Voltshot, although my assumption is that it would. If you know more about that, please let me know in the comments. With legendary weapons now done, I'll go over the few exotics that synergize with Arc 3.0. Exotics that apply Jolt are the Delicate Tomb Fusion Rifle, the Darcy Sniper Rifle, and the Two-Tailed Fox Rocket Launcher, so long as you have its Catalyst. Exotics that apply Blind are the Grand Overture Machine Gun when shooting its missile volley, so long as you have its Catalyst, and the Queenbreaker Linear Fusion Rifle. Exotics that generate Ionic Traces are the Cold Heart Trace Rifle and the Delicate Tomb Fusion Rifle. Any one of these exotics you see on screen will do very well to synergize with your build. One last exotic weapon I have to mention is the Trinity Ghoul Bow. Trinity Ghoul is absolutely phenomenal with this build, as it ad clears like no other. Plus, its Catalyst allows any arc damage final blow to proc its Lightning Rod perk, which includes your Sentient Dark Soul. The gameplay in the background of this video sees me using Trinity Ghoul, and if you've been watching it at all, you can see just how amazing it is at clearing ads very quickly, especially with the help of the Sentient Dark Soul. Lastly, for this video, I'll go over a quick playstyle that suits this build. Firstly, upon entering an engagement, consume your grenade to summon your Sentient Arc Soul and become amplified. Now, for the next 15 seconds or so, just go to town killing enemies, summoning Ionic Traces every so often with your arc weapons and kills via your Sentient Arc Soul. Every Ionic Trace you collect will refresh your amplified buff duration in addition to granting you ability energy. So, if there are enough ads around, you will be able to use your grenade to kill some enemies and still have it fully regenerated by the time you need to consume it again. If you find your Sentient Arc Soul's timer getting low and you don't have another grenade to consume, use your Rift to refresh its timer instead. This won't instantly amplify you, but it will refresh your Sentient Arc Soul's timer back to its maximum of 20 seconds, allowing you more time to either fully regenerate your grenade's energy to consume it and become amplified, or to generate an Ionic Trace and become amplified that way. But that's basically it. Manage the duration of your Sentient Arc Soul, generate Ionic Traces and Orbs of Power to regenerate your grenade ability faster to ensure you have it up when you need it, and enjoy having your Arc Buddy alongside you as the both of you shoot aliens. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. As I explained in my last video, I will be taking next week off of making build guides in order to get my bearings on the new season's meta and artifact mods. Next Friday, I will be uploading our team's day 1 completion of the new dungeon, as well as hopefully a solo flawless run on the weekend, so look forward to that if those are videos that interest you. Anyways, if you have any questions, constructive criticisms, or alternative ideas, please leave them in the comments. I read them all and reply to most of them. I appreciate anybody taking the time to comment, so thank you in advance. If you liked this video and would like to see more like it, leave a like and subscribe as well. Both of those help me to make more of these in the future. Thank you again for watching, and have a great day!